Good day, friends. So, in this fifth part, we will start with chapter 1 of Srimad Bhagavad Geeta Rahasya, or the philosophy of energism, or in other words, proper action. This chapter 1 is the introductory chapter, which starts with opening verse in Sanskrit from Mahabharata. The Srimad Bhagavad Gita is one of the most brilliant and pure gems of our ancient sacred books. It would be difficult to find a similar work in Sanskrit literature, or even in all the literature of the world, than the Gita, which explains to us in an unambiguous and succinct manner the deep and sacred principles of the sacred science of the self, or Atma. After imparting to us the knowledge of the human body and the cosmos, and on the authority of those principles, acquaints every human being with the most perfect and complete condition of the self. That is to say, with what the highest manhood is, and which further establishes a logical and admirable harmony between devotion, or bhakti, and spiritual knowledge, or jnana in local language, and ultimately between both these and the duties of ordinary life enjoined by the Shastras, thereby inspiring the mind, bewildered by the vicissitudes of life, to calmly and, what is more, desirelessly adhere to the path of duty. The Sanskrit verse in the beginning means that one should first offer obeisance to Narayana, to Nara, the most excellent among men, to Devi Saraswati, and to Vyasa, and then begin to recite the Jaya, that is, the Mahabharata. The two rishis, Nara and Narayana, were the two components into which the Paramatma had broken itself up, and Arjun and Sri Krishna were their later incarnations, as has been stated in the Mahabharata. So even if one examines the work looking upon it as a poem, this work, which simplifies to every reader, young or old, the numerous abstruse doctrines of self-knowledge in inspired language, and is replete with the sweetness of devotion plus self-realization. It will certainly be looked upon as an excellent poem. The preeminent worth, therefore, of a book which contains the quintessence of Vedic religion, uttered by the voice of the blessed Lord, can best only be imagined. It is stated at the commencement of the Anugita that after the Bharat war was over and Sri Krishna and Arjun were one day chatting together, Arjun, conceiving the desire of hearing the Gita again from the lips of the blessed Lord, said to Sri Krishna, "I have forgotten the advice you gave me when the war commenced. so please repeat it to me." In the reply, the blessed Lord said to him that even he could not repeat that advice in the same way, because on the previous occasion the advice had been given when his mind was in the highest yogic state. This is referred from Mahabharata Ashwamedha, chapter 16, stanzas 10 to 13. Really speaking, nothing was impossible for the blessed Lord, but his answer that it would be impossible for him to repeat the Gita clearly reveals the excellent worth of the Gita. The fact that the Gita is considered by all the different traditionary schools of the Vedic religion for over 25 centuries to be as vulnerable and authoritative as the Vedas themselves is due to the same cause. And on the same account, this work, which is as old as the Smritis, has been appropriately, though figuratively, described in the Gita Jnana as follows. All the Upanishads are, so to say, cows. The blessed Lord, Shri Krishna, is himself the drawer of the milk, that is, milkman. The intelligent Arjuna is the drinker, the calf, which causes the flow of milk in the cows. And when these unprecedented circumstances have come about, the milk which has been drawn is the Gita nectar to the highest order. Gita nectar of the highest order. It cannot therefore be a matter of surprise that any number of translations, commentaries, or expositions of this work have appeared in all the vernacular languages of India. But after the Westerners have got acquainted with Sanskrit, there have been made any number of translations of the Gita into Greek, Latin, German, French, English, etc. And this wonderful work has now come to be known throughout the world. Not only does this work contain the quintessence of all the Upanishads, but the full name of this work is Srimad Bhagavad Gita Upanishad. The enunciative words conveying that the chapter is closed, which are used at the end of each chapter of the Gita, contain the words Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gitasu Upanishadsu Brahma Vidyaya Yoga Shastre Shri Krishnarjuna Samvade, etc. That is, thus the conversation between Shri Krishna and Arjun on the Karma Yoga science, that is to say, on the science of the yoga based on knowledge of the Brahman in the Upanishad sung by the blessed Lord. Although these enunciative words are not to be found in the original Bharat, yet as we find them in all the editions of Gita, one may draw the inference that mode of enunciation must have come into vogue when the Gita was for the first time separated from the Mahabharata for daily recital. That is to say, before any commentary was written on it. And I shall explain later on the importance of these words in determining the import of the Gita from this point of view. For the present, it is necessary for us to consider only the words Bhagavad Gita-tsu Upanishadsu. Although the word Upanishad is of the neuter gender in the Marathi language, yet as it is of the feminine gender in Sanskrit, so the idea, the Upanishad sung, that is, told by the blessed Lord, is conveyed in Sanskrit by the expression Srimad Bhagavad Gita Upanishad, a compound of an adjective and a noun in the feminine gender. And although the work is singular in number, yet it has become customary to refer to it in the plural number by way of respect. One comes across the plural seventh case ended form of Srimad Bhagavad Gita Upanishadsu, even in the commentary or bhashya in local language written by Shankaracharya. We came across the expression iti Gitasu in the plural number with reference to this work. But in contracting the expression, the affixes or words used for indicating respect and also the common noun Upanishad at the end, indicative of a class, being dropped, the two first case ended singular words Srimad Bhagavad Gita and Upanishad have at first been changed into Bhagavad Gita and later on merely Gita, which is a feminine and extensively contracted form, as has been the case with the names Kena, Katha, Chandogya, etc. If the word Upanishad had not occurred in the original name, then the name of this work would have been contracted into the neuter form Bhagavad Gitam or merely Gitam, as has been the case with Bhagavatam or Bharatam or Gopi Gitam. But as instead of that, the word has remained in the feminine form as Bhagavad Gita or Gita, we must always take the word Upanishad as implied after it. The word Anugita has been interpreted in the same way in the commentary of Arjuna Mishra on the Anugita. But we find that the word Gita is applied not only to the Bhagavad Gita of 700 verses, but also in an ordinary meaning to many other works dealing with the spiritual knowledge. For instance, in certain sundry chapters of the Moksha Parva, included in the Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata, we find that the names Pingala Gita, Sampaka Gita, Manik Gita, Bodhya Gita, Vikakshu Gita, Harita Gita, Vitraga Gita, Parashara Gita, and Hamsa Gita have been used, and one part of the Anugita in the Ashwamedha Parva has been called by the separate and special name of Brahmana Gita. Besides these, there are also numerous other Gitas which are well known, such as the Avadhuta Gita, Ashtavakra Gita, Ishvara Gita, Uttar Gita, Kapila Gita, Ganesh Gita, Devi Gita, Pandava Gita, Brahma Gita, Bhikshu Gita, Yama Gita, Rama Gita, Vyasa Gita, Shiva Gita, Sutta Gita, Surya Gita, etc. Some of these exist independently, whereas the others are to be found in different Puranas. For instance, the Ganesha Gita is to be found at the end of the Ganesh Puran in the Krida Khanda, in the 130th to 140th chapters, and one may say that it is a faithful copy of the Bhagavad Gita with slight verbal differences. The Ishwar Gita is to be found in the first 11 chapters in the Uttar Vibhaga of the Kumara Puran, and the Vyasa Gita starts in the next chapter. The Brahma Gita is to be found in the first 12 chapters of the latter portion of the fourth, that is the Yajna Vaibhava Khanda of the Sutta Samhita, included in the Skanda Puran, and the Sutta Gita is in the subsequent 8 chapters. There is to be found a Brahma Gita different from this Brahma Gita of the Skanda Purana in the 173rd to 181st stanzas of the latter half of the chapter on Nirvana in the Yoga Vasishtha. The Yama Gita is of 3 kinds. The first is to be found in the 7th chapter of the 3rd part of the Vishnu Puran, and the second one in the 381st chapter of the 3rd division or Khanda of the Agni Puran, and the third one in the 8th chapter of Nrsimha Puran. The same is the case with Rama Gita. The Rama Gita, which is in common acceptance in this part of the country, is to be found in the 5th Sarga of the Uttar Skanda of the Adhyatma Ramayana. And this Adhyatma Ramayana is looked upon as part of the Brahmanda Purana. But there is also another Rama Gita to be found in the work known as Guru Jnana Vasishta Tattva Sarayana, which is well known on the Madras side. This book deals with Vedanta philosophy and is divided into 3 divisions or khandas called the Jnana, Upasana and Karma. In the first 18 chapters of the second part or Pada, called the Upasana Kanda, we find the Rama Gita, and in the first 5 chapters of the third part of the third Khanda, called the Karma Kanda, we find the Surya Gita. The Shiva Gita is to be in the Patala Khanda of the Padma Puran. But in the edition of this Puran, which has been printed in the Anandashram press in Pune, we do not find the Shiva Gita. Pandit Jwala Prasad has stated in his book called Ashtadasha Purana Darshana, that is survey of 18 Puranas, that it is to be found in the Gaudiya Padmottara Purana, and in the table of contents of the Padma Purana, which is given along with those of other Puranas in the Narad Purana, we find a reference to the Shiva Gita. Besides these, the Hamsa Gita is to be found in the 13th chapter of the 11th skandha of the Sri Bhagavad Purana, and the Bhikshu Gita is to be found in the 23rd chapter of the same skandha, and the Kapileyopakhana contained in the chapters 23 to 33 of the third skandha is also known as Kapila Gita. But I have seen an independent printed book by the name Kapila Gita. This Kapila Gita deals principally with Hatha Yoga, and one finds it stated in it that it has been taken from the Padma Purana. However, not only do we not find it in the Padma Purana, but as we find it in one place, such words as Jaina, Jangama, or Lingayat, and Sophie, a Mohammedan saint, we have to say that it must have been written after the Mohammedan rule commenced. As in the Bhagavad Purana, so also in the Devi Bhagavata, we find a Gita from the 31st to 40th chapters of the 7th skandha. So that Gita is supposed to have come out of the mouth of the Devi. It is called the Devi Gita. Besides these, a summary of the Bhagavad Gita itself is to be found in the 380th chapter of the third khanda of the Agni Purana, as also in the 247th chapter of the Purva Khanda of the Garuda Purana. In the same way, although it is stated that the work Yoga Vasishtha was recited by Vasishtha to Rama in the Rama incarnation, yet we find a summary of the Bhagavad Gita which was preached to Arjuna by the Blessed Lord in the subsequent Krishna incarnation, reproduced in the last, that is, in the Nirvana chapter, in which many verses are taken as they are from Bhagavad Gita, and it is given the name Arjunopakhana. I have stated above that the Shiva Gita is not to be found in the Padma Purana printed at Pune, but though that is so, yet a Bhagavad Gita Mahatmya is described from the 171st to the 188th chapters of the Uttarakhanda of this edition of the Padma Purana, and one chapter of this Mahatmya is dedicated to each chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and it also contains traditionary stories about the same. There is besides one Gita Mahatmya in the Varaha Purana, and it is said that there is also a third Gita Mahatmya in the Shaiva or Vayu Purana. But I do not come across it in the Vayu Purana printed in Calcutta. A small chapter of 9 verses called Gita Dhyana is to be found printed in the beginning of the printed editions of the Bhagavad Gita, but I cannot say from where it has been taken. Nevertheless, the verse Bhishma Drona Tata Jayadratha Jala. From these 9 verses is to be found with slight verbal differences at the very commencement of the recently published drama of Bhasha called Urubhanga. Therefore, it would seem that this Gita Dhyana must have come into vogue probably after the date of the dramatist Bhasha, because it would be more proper to say that the Gita Dhyana has been prepared by borrowing different verses from different texts and writing some new verses, rather than to say that a well-known dramatist like Bhasha has taken that verse from the Gita Dhyana. As the dramatist Bhasha lived before Kalidas, his date cannot at most be later than Shaka 300. From what has been stated above, one can understand which and how many copies and good or bad imitations, summaries or mahatmyas of the Gita are to be found in the Puranas. One cannot definitely say to what Puranas some Gitas like Avadhuta Gita, the Ashtavakra Gita, etc. Belong, and if they do not form part of any Puranas, then by whom and when they were independently written. Yet, if one considers the arrangement of the disposition of subject matters in all these Gitas, one will see that all these works must have been written after the Bhagavad Gita had come into prominence and acquired general acceptance. Nay, one may even go further and say that these various Gitas have been brought into existence with the idea that the sacred literature of a particular sect or a Purana does not become complete unless it contains a Gita similar to the Bhagavad Gita. As in the Bhagavad Gita, the blessed Lord first showed to Arjuna his cosmic form and then preached to him the divine knowledge. So also is the case with the Shiva Gita and Devi Gita or the Ganesh Gita, and in the Shiva Gita, Ishvara Gita, etc. we find many verses taken literally from the Bhagavad Gita. Considering the matter from the point of view of spiritual knowledge, these various Gitas do not contain anything more than the Bhagavad Gita. But what is more, the wonderful skill of establishing a harmony between the realization of the highest self, that is Adhyatma in the local language, and action or karma, which is seen in the Bhagavad Gita, is not to be found in any one of these Gitas. Somebody has subsequently written the Uttara Gita as a supplement to the Bhagavad Gita in the form of a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, in the belief that the Patanjali Yoga or the Hatha Yoga or the philosophy of renunciation or sannyasa by abandonment of action has not been sufficiently well described in the Bhagavad Gita, and the Avadhuta and the Ashtavakra and some other Gitas are purely one-sided, that is to say, they are only in support of the path of renunciation, and the Yama Gita, Pandava Gita and some other Gitas are very small and purely devotional, like eulogistic hymns. It is true that the same is not the case with the Shiva Gita, the Ganesha Gita, and the Surya Gita, and they contain a skillful harmonizing of action and spiritual knowledge. Yet, as that exposition in them has been more or less adopted from Bhagavad Gita, there is no novelty about them. Therefore, these Pauranic stale Gitas, which have come into existence later on, fall into the shade before the profound and comprehensive brilliance of the Bhagavad Gita, and the excellence of the Bhagavad Gita has been all the more established and enhanced by these imitation Gitas, and the word Gita has come to mean Bhagavad Gita principally. Although the works Adhyatma Ramayana and Yoga Vasishtha are more exhaustive, yet from their construction they are evidently of a later date. The Guru Jnana Vasishtha Tattva Sarayana of the Madras Presidency is a very ancient work according to some, but I am not of that opinion because it contains a reference to 108 Upanishads, and it cannot be said that all of them are ancient. And if one considers the Surya Gita, we find in it a reference to qualified monism or Vishishtadvaita, and in some places the arguments too seem to have adopted from the Bhagavad Gita, and therefore one has to come to the conclusion that even this work was written much later on, possibly even after the death of Sri Shankaracharya. So friends, the balance part of this first introductory chapter we will listen to in the next parts.